Hey, I'm Matt Geiger. My goal is to tell the full story, not the liberal story or the conservative story. That's why I'm doing the research myself to give a moderate's take on the issues. First, I'm going to take a look at the process an immigrant goes through to come to the US. And then I'm going to look at the immigrant and border situation that we've got right now. The visa system's really complicated, but we've got to understand it if we want to improve our immigration system. In the strictest sense, a visa is a stamp on a passport that grants somebody the ability to come to the United States. So let's start by breaking it down into two categories. You have non-immigrant visas for people who are coming to the US for a specific reason and returning to their own country after a certain amount of time. And then you've got immigrant visas. Those are the visas that lead to green cards, and those are for people who are staying permanently in the United States. Non-immigrant visas don't have a direct route to citizenship, but we still need to understand them for two reasons. The first is that it's not uncommon for somebody to enter the country on a non-immigrant visa and then file for a change of status to an immigrant category. But the second reason is that non-immigrant visa system is the most common way illegal immigrants get into the country. They enter legally and then they overstay their temporary visa. The biggest visa category by far is tourism and business trips, the B1 and B2 visas. Those make up nearly 3/4 of all non-immigrant visas and will let somebody stay in the US for 6 months. Temporary workers are the next largest group. They make up 9%. That's where your H-1B and H-2A visas come in, which are two of the more high-profile categories, with each one making up roughly half of that 9%. H-1B visas are for specialty occupations. So to get these visas, a company needs to prove that a job requires specialized knowledge and can't be filled by somebody in the US. The people who come over on H-1B visas need to have at least bachelor's degrees. So you usually see them in industries like biotech, computing, engineering, chemistry, medicine, or research. So to get an H-1B visa, a U.S. employer needs to sponsor somebody from another country, and that allows them to get entered into a visa lottery. Once per year, 65,000 H-1B visas are randomly issued based on that lottery. The problem, though, is that you see sometimes like double, triple, quadruple that number of people trying to get the visas. So the H-2A visa is another high-profile temporary worker visa, and that's for agricultural work. There is no limit on the number of visas issued, and the duration of each visa depends on the work that needs to get done, anywhere from 1 month to 10 months. As far as the employer's responsibility, they have to provide inbound and outbound transportation, they have to provide free housing, they have to provide meals, which they're allowed to charge the employee for, and daily transportation. All the state or federal minimum wage laws and U.S. labor standards still apply, just like they would for a U.S. employee. And there's actually a heavy emphasis with this visa that foreign workers be treated exactly the same as U.S. workers in the same job. That covers the vast majority of non-immigrant visas, but there are some of the other common ones, like the F visas, which are student visas, C visas for people traveling through the U.S. on to somewhere else, A visas for ambassadors or government officials, and then J visas for work and study exchanges. So the US government views these non-immigrant visas as being separate from the immigrant visa categories. So all the visas I'll talk about now allow somebody to come to America, get a green card, making them a permanent resident, which is ultimately the path to becoming a citizen. The first way somebody from another country can get a green card is to be an immediate relative. That's specifically a child, parent, or spouse of a current U.S. citizen. This is the only category of immigrant visa that doesn't have a numerical limit, and that's why the wait is basically only as long as it takes to fill out the paperwork. In 2019, almost half of people got green cards this way. So the second category is the family-sponsored preference, and within that, you have 4 different buckets. In general, these buckets cover adult sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, as well as their children. It covers spouses and children of green card holders, and it covers brothers or sisters of U.S. citizens. Each bucket has its own visa limit, so that's one reason that you might hear about long wait times to get a visa. But the more significant impact is that no more than 7% of the total visas in a given year can go to any one country across all the visa categories. So this has created these huge waits for people from certain countries like Mexico, the Philippines, China, and India, because you can see our system's heavily based on family ties. About 70% of green cards were issued based on on being either an immediate relative or from family-based preference. The next category is employment-based preference. This category has 5 different preference buckets for employees with exceptional abilities, advanced degrees, necessary skills, or for investors who will invest at least $1 million and hire people in the US. These preference buckets do have limits, but most don't have any wait times except for countries like China or Mexico that may have a couple years. Refugees and asylees make up about 10% of all green card holders. There's a limit on the number of refugees admitted each year, and that's set by the president. That number was at 110,000 in 2017, but that's fallen a ton to 18,000 in 2020. Asylees are the same as refugees, except that people seeking asylum are in the US or at the border, and refugees aren't. The other big difference is that there's not a limit set on people seeking asylum. Asylum is always a massive political football, so I'm going to take some time to explain just how it works. There are 4 slightly different processes depending on which group somebody is in seeking asylum. So if you're inside the US and not in the process of being deported, it's called the affirmative asylum process. In the affirmative asylum process, keep in mind you're already in the US, whether that's legally or illegally, you'd fill out a form that leads to an interview with an asylum officer with the USCIS, US Citizenship and Immigration Services. That falls under the Department of Homeland Security. In that interview, the asylum officer is trying to determine whether you meet the definition of a refugee under the Refugee Act of 1980. That is, somebody who is unable or unwilling to return to their country because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. If the asylum officer determines that you meet the definition of a refugee, you're granted asylum status and the process is done. If not, you either have to leave the US when your visa's up, or if you're in the US illegally, you are automatically referred to the immigration judge for deportation. So if you're in the US illegally, you're taking a massive gamble by going the affirmative asylum route. So all the rest of these are defensive asylum processes, meaning that you're in the process of being deported. If somebody's apprehended at a port of entry or within 100 miles of the border, they're put through the expedited removal process, which is its own politicized issue. But if that person, through that process, claims asylum, then they go to a USCIS asylum officer who conducts an interview where they're going to determine if there is a credible fear of persecution, meaning that there is a significant possibility that person could establish in front of an immigration judge that they're a refugee. So if the asylum officer decides that there is a significant possibility, in other words, there's a credible fear, then it goes before an immigration judge. If not, they can appeal to an immigration judge to determine if the judge thinks there's a credible fear, but if they don't do that, they're removed from the country. For people with prior removals or aggravated felonies, there's a very similar process, but it's a reasonable fear interview, so that's a higher bar that they need to convince the asylum officer that there's a reasonable fear of persecution or torture if they go back to their home country. But the rest of the process plays out exactly the same. And the last category is if you're apprehended in the country illegally, and that goes straight to an immigration judge. So if you remember, all the defensive asylum processes ended with either deportation on one hand or a hearing before an immigration judge. So this is effectively the same point where all these flow. And here the judge is determining whether or not you meet that definition of a refugee. Not whether it's reasonable or credible, just can you prove you meet that strict definition? If you can, you get asylum status. If not, you're deported, with the possibility of an appeal, obviously, for either side. The last significant visa category is the diversity lottery. The US allocates 55,000 visas for people from countries that haven't historically had large numbers of immigrants to the US. So in 2019, about 12 million people applied to the lottery. So you have to be super lucky to get one of these 55,000 visas. So once you actually have a green card, that's what's known as a permanent resident. And to get citizenship from there, you need to have your green card and live in the US for 5 years. You have to be a person of good moral character. You have to demonstrate an attachment to the principles and ideals of the US Constitution. You have to be able to read, write, and speak basic English, have a basic understanding of US history and government. And then finally, you take an oath of allegiance to the United States. So I've gone through what it takes to become a permanent resident and ultimately a citizen. So what is a person entitled entitled to at each step. Opportunities for undocumented immigrants can vary a lot state by state. Right now, there are 16 states that let an undocumented immigrant get a driver's license. In terms of benefits, undocumented immigrants have access to emergency Medicaid, like if they show up at a hospital, they get treated, but they can't have full Medicaid. And then they're able to get WIC, Women, Infant, Children Assistance. That's money for healthy foods for pregnant women, new mothers, and young children. And then undocumented immigrant children can go to K through 12 public schools. Any other federal programs, though, are not allowed. For permanent residents, so that's the same as green card holders, the list of benefits is a lot longer, but it's basically the full list of benefits that a citizen would get, but with catches on almost all of them. Usually either that's holding the green card for at least 5 years, or it's working at least 10 years, on top of meeting the program criteria, obviously. So now most of these are federal-state partnership programs, so they're going to vary a lot by state, so I'm just going to talk in general. So a green card holder can get SSI, that's supplemental security income, if they've done both of these. In the country 5 years and working in the U.S. 10 years. They're going to be eligible for Social Security and SNAP, that's food stamps, if they've worked 10 years in the U.S. A permanent resident needs to meet that 5 years as a green card holder threshold for Medicare, full Medicaid, temporary assistance for needy families, that's TAMF, and SCHIP, State Children's Health Insurance Program. And then all green card holders are eligible for Section 8 housing vouchers, and also all are eligible for the Affordable Care Act exchanges and subsidies. And then in terms of Social Security numbers, driver's licenses, things like that, permanent residents can do all the same things as citizens. So with regard to working and living day to day, green card holders are much more similar to citizens than they are to undocumented immigrants. One last thing I want to explain is DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So this was initially implemented by President Obama and then rescinded under President Trump. And the reason that it could just be kind of turned on and off like that is because it's not a law that was passed by Congress. It was a memorandum issued by the executive branch through DHS, that's Department of Homeland Security. And what it said was that people who are brought to the U.S. as children and been here a really long time can avoid deportation and get a work permit for 2 years by filing with USCIS. The idea behind this is that we have limited resources to deport people, ultimately. So let's just focus on the higher priority immigrants instead of the people who didn't make the choice to come here and the people who have been here their entire lives. So when we step back and we take inventory, our immigration system strongly favors immediate family. Beyond that massive chunk, the options for coming to the U.S. really aren't that great. The immigration process is so crucial, specifically for a country like the United States. And as a country, we need to be very clear about what we value. And then we need to create a system that reflects those values. And until we do that, our immigration system will limit the potential of our country and its citizens. Thanks for watching. Hey, if you found this video interesting or useful, please give it a thumbs up, put a comment below, and subscribe to my channel to get any updates on new videos. If you didn't like it, you should probably go ahead and put a comment below too to let everybody know. Either way, thanks for watching.